We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Sebastian, thanks for being on the podcast. You know, your book, The Perfect Storm, is probably one of the first books that I remember well. Just the time frame it came out. I was in middle school when it came out, and it was just a well-written story, something that stuck with me. Plus, they made a movie out of it with Mark Wahlberg, so it just adds to the memory for you. But quick question on that one. Did you get to meet Mark Wahlberg and George Clooney as you were making that?
Yeah, I mean, I was on set for maybe a total of a few days, and I got to meet all the stars, all nice people. I
hear Mark Wahlberg's a cool guy. I don't know about the rest of them, but I hear Mark is a good guy. I just read your book, Freedom, last night, actually. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Tribe. I've never gotten to read Tribe yet, but I think I have a pretty good understanding of what it's about, considering it's about how veterans feel about war, and there I think conflicting opinions on it, curious on your insights on that. But actually, I want to give people a little bit more of your bio too. You're not only with The Perfect Storm, you're also involved in that documentary Korengal. Not just that, but Tribe, as well as the HBO documentary The Last Patrol. Been writing for quite a while, and you're primarily covering wars. So you embed yourself in some of the craziest situations in places like Afghanistan. What got you into that? Did you, before you wrote The Perfect Storm, before I got to know you as a kid, were you already doing this kind of war journalism? I think you were, right, in Bosnia?
Yeah, I went to Bosnia in 93, 94, and eventually came home to write The Perfect Storm. And as soon as I turned the manuscript in, these were wars that America was not involved with, right? So it's not like I was embedded with U.S. forces or anything. I was with indigenous groups. And so then the first thing I did after I turned the manuscript in, which back then literally was you took a pile of paper, your manuscript, and dropped it on your editor's desk. Like that's how that worked back then. Literally the next day I was on a plane to Delhi, and I spent some time in Afghanistan in the summer of 1996 as the Taliban were taking over. And then I went back in 2000. I was with Ahmad Shah Massoud as his forces fought the Taliban and Al Qaeda. And then I went back there after 9/11. I was with his same commanders when they took Kabul. And eventually I was with American forces in 05 and then 07, 08. I made a film called Restrepo about a combat outpost in Kunar province with my late friend and colleague and brother, Tim Hetherington.
Restrepo, there was a lot of combat in Restrepo, and I saw that movie. Did you know it was going to be that hot of a situation before you stepped out there? Were you looking for that? I mean, I'm curious what the motivation is from a journalist point of view, because I really get it from a soldier's point of view, but I don't quite understand it from a journalist's point of view. I mean, what were you looking for? What were you expecting?
I think it's not that different. I mean, I know the guys that were out there, 2nd Platoon Battle Company, 173rd Airborne, they told me that originally they were supposed to go to Iraq, and I refused to cover Iraq. I thought it was a mistake, and I didn't want any part of it. Afghanistan, was a country that meant a lot to me, and then after 9/11, I thought the U.S. could do a lot of good there, and the Afghans clearly were dying for us to be involved. I saw that with my own eyes in Kabul. When Kabul was liberated, the sort of joy and celebration on the streets was extraordinary. And so basically the guys I was with, when they found out they're going to Afghanistan, to this sort of forgotten corner of Afghanistan, the Korengal Valley, their big concern was that there wouldn't be any combat, that they'd have to sit around drinking tea and talking to village elders. And, that likewise as a journalist, like I didn't want to cover a platoon that was sitting around drinking tea with village elders. Like, I'd done plenty of that in my life in Afghanistan. And, I wanted to know what it was like to be an American soldier in combat in Afghanistan. And that's exactly what I got in the Korangal. I think journalists have the same sense of mission, carried out differently, but the same desire for a sense of mission, a sense of meaning, a sense of being in the crucial spot at the crucial time. Journalists have all those same feelings that combat infantry does.
Well, yeah. But I would add to that, people want to be in combat. And you're right about this. You center in on this notion. Why do guys, even ones with PTSD, have this drive to go back? It's like they need to go back. And it's difficult to explain that to civilians who have never experienced it, or who never desired it in the first place, right? It's difficult to explain to people why on earth I'd want to be a Navy SEAL, and why I find it so awful when I do a deployment that doesn't have any combat in it. It makes me sound like a crazy person. So how do you make me not sound like a crazy person?
Well, yeah, so we evolved. We're social primates. We're designed to survive and to thrive in groups. Humans die in nature almost immediately if they're alone, right? But we exist in groups and always have. And so being part of a functioning group is, in evolutionary terms, is what we're all looking for. And the more adversity the group is facing, the better it has to function as a group, and the more crucial each individual becomes in the group. And so one of the things that people really seem to like is being fully utilized. And I think modern society, which is industrialized and highly technological, doesn't require people to be highly utilized in a physical sense to assure their own survival, their day-to-day survival. That's almost sort of like taken as a given that you're going to survive day-to-day in modern society. You're not looking for your food. You're not looking for shelter. That's great. That's a great liberation from this sort of hardships of human existence as they have been for 100,000 years. But there's something lost there. And what's lost there is your own sense of being crucial to your small survival group and feeling fully utilized. And so if you take a bunch of guys and put them in combat, or women, put them in combat, all of a sudden they get to experience what our human ancestors lived day after day for 200,000 years. They get to experience that sense of being necessary to a group. And that is intoxicating.
Okay, it is. And I think that's part of it. But a lot of people choose, let's say, their mission or their pathway in life based on that basic need to have a sense of purpose, to feel like they're part of a sense of community. It's why we have sports, honestly, because we used to have warring tribes, and it seems like civilization has now transformed that warring tribe mentality into baseball or football, but combat's still a very different thing. And I still sound crazy. I'm sorry, I do. I still sound crazy because I sought it out, and I was disappointed if I didn't get it, just like the guys that you were deployed with, just like you would have been. And does that make me an adrenaline junkie? Does that, or are we just looking for the most extreme version of that principle that you're talking about? I don't know.
I think I can't speak to women's experience, but I can speak to men's experience. And I think young men, among other things, are looking to prove themselves. And so it's a known statistic that young men die from violence and accidents at 6 times the rate that young women do, right? So they're clearly, soldier or otherwise, if they're just kids in a neighborhood, teenage boys, men in their early 20s, are clearly looking for situations that are dangerous, that test them. And as a result, they die at 6 times the rate that young women do. And I think part of what they're doing is, in some ways, young men don't think forward. They're not forward thinking the same way that women can be. There's like real data on this. They don't think about consequences as clearly as young women do. There's a lot of studies about all this. But in addition to all of that neurological stuff, all the neurological differences, In addition, I think young men often feel like they have to prove themselves in order to be a worthy member of society and deserving of all the good that comes from being an adult. You get a spouse, a family, a job, the respect of your peers, of your community, of your elders. And all of those things come to someone who's sort of proven themselves. And you can't prove yourself in any meaningful way sitting around drinking tea, right? You need a situation that's dangerous and hard and where you can either act well or poorly. And hopefully you'll act well, although no one really knows until the moment happens.
Do you think everybody feels that way? So I agree with that. I think that probably explains why, say, a lot of us in the teams at least would want to go to buds as opposed to, basic training. Why? For the sole reason that it's harder and it makes me prove myself more than other training would have. One of the things I wonder is that sentiment going away in American society, this need to prove yourself, or this valuing of suffering, right? Because that's kind of what you're talking about. Like, you need to be in a tough situation to prove yourself. Is that going away in American society to a dangerous degree, where we actually start to think that it's up to somebody else to take care of us, or any suffering that I endure, any hardship that I endure is actually some kind of injustice against me that I should be complaining about, that I should be demanding reparations for. It's just, I don't know, I'm in politics, obviously, so my mind always goes to that. It's one of my biggest concerns that value, that principle you're talking about, that drive isn't really there. More and more and more, it's not there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I'm not sure there's one simple answer, partly because there isn't one monolithic American society. There's many American societies, and American society is divided racially, it's divided economically, it's divided by region. I would say that there's a large swath, and again, I'm not going to speak for women, I can't. But I can speak for men to some degree, and I would say there's a large swath of young American manhood that feels like they have to prove themselves. And I think there's a growing, probably predominantly left-wing elite on campuses and in urban areas where that is less of an issue for young men. And where that leaves them, I don't know. And I'm not even saying one is healthy and the other isn't healthy. I mean, I'm offering no comment other than there does seem to be a sort of like part of the population that tends to be urban, coastal, and left-wing and elite, where the definition of, and I'm going to put this in quotes, the definition of manhood, not only is it ambiguous, it actually is sanctioned against. Like, even the conversation about what does it mean to be a man is a conversation that will make people uncomfortable. And I think the basis for that is the idea, and it's an idea that's worth discussing because it has such huge consequences, that if you make divisions between the sexes, you're positioning one sex to have advantages that the other doesn't. And if you pretend, if you propose the fiction that there really are no differences between the genders, they're all the same, and there's no functional definition of manhood versus womanhood, it's all the same, then hopefully that will end sexism. I don't think it will, and I don't think that's biologically, the whole premise is not biologically true. So, but that's I think the fiction that the left wing, and I say this as I'm a registered Democrat, I'm a liberal in a lot of ways, but I think that's the fiction that the left wing sort of proposes as a sort of shortcut solution to the problem, the very real problem of sexism in America.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between liberals and leftists. And so I'm always careful as a conservative, I'm always very careful to distinguish between those two types of people. As you describe yourself as a liberal, but there's sane liberalism that I can understand and disagree with. And then there's the postmodernist leftism, which seeks to undermine basic foundations and traditions, sometimes for no other reason except that we just need change, and we're not sure why, but we just want it. And that seems to be where that's coming from. And I think that's an interesting take. And I always listen to Jordan Peterson talk about that particular subject with the differences between men and women. And as it turns out, the more egalitarian you make men and women in places like the Nordic countries, the more different they actually become. So it just doesn't have the outcome that people think it will. I want to go back to Afghanistan though, because we kind of started there, and then we'll get to freedom. There's a few threads I want to pull on from that book, but obviously we both have experience in Afghanistan. I'm curious on what your thoughts are. I'm also curious, just going back to the theme that we were just talking about. Again, as a journalist embedded with these guys, did you ever want to get into the combat yourself? Were you ever frustrated that you didn't get to participate and pick up that weapon and get after it with these guys?
Well, yeah, I mean, I felt very much like I was part of the group, but there was one last and very important thing that separated me from them, which was I wasn't carrying a weapon, and they were, and my security was entirely dependent on them, and I couldn't contribute to that, right? And granted, I was a lot older than most of those guys, but as a man and as a group member, on some level, I felt like I wasn't pulling my weight, even though I'm sure none of those guys thought that, right? But I felt that, but I'm also very clear about the sort of ethics of journalism. And there weren't, I mean, as you know, there aren't M4s just laying around an outpost that don't have owners, right? It's not like I could go to the gun rack and grab an extra M4. And even if I could have, I wouldn't have, because A, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want to shoot someone in the back by accident. But also I had a job, right? I mean, that I take very seriously. I was there to document the experience of American infantry in combat at a remote outpost. And if I pick up a gun, all of a sudden I'm not doing the job that all those guys understand me to be doing, and that they're helping me do, right? And they had sort of signed on to this. They're like, all right, you really want to do this? You really want to be here off and on for a year and really document this? All right, we'll help you do that, right? We'll talk to you. We'll make sure you guys are okay. We'll get you what you need if we can possibly do it. They're amazing guys. And so if I put down the camera and grab the gun, I'm just becoming another of those guys. And I've stopped being in the role that they themselves had signed on for to help me do. And that seemed like a kind of betrayal.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. It's just again, coming from my background, it would be hard to resist. What do you think?
The impulse, listen, I mean, but just to be clear, the thought was there, the impulse was there, and the sister company, Chosen Company, they got into an ambush where they took 100% casualties, right? Yeah. I mean, everybody had a bullet in them, and the wounded were helping patch up the wounded and fighting off the enemy. And Tim and I had a conversation. We were like, that could happen to Battle Company, that could happen to us too. And if that happens, we need to know how to dress a wound, to put it in an IV bag, and to operate an M4. And so we went to the platoon sergeant and said, like, we want to know how to do all that stuff just in case, right? Yeah. And so we got trained up on everything. And, of course, there were offers to like jump on the 50 during a firefight and shoot off a couple of bursts across the valley. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that unless lives depend on it. And they're clearly not right now. And I'm not going to do this as a lark. This is serious business. Like, that's your tool. My tool is a camera, unless everyone's got a bullet in them. And then I'm going to do anything I have to save my life and the lives of everyone around me.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think about everything that's happened in Afghanistan? What do you think about what led up to it? And I'll tell you, I'll kind of briefly go over my position if you haven't already heard it. I mean, I've been, and by the way, this is a conversation. You can always ask me questions. You're a journalist, so you're good at asking questions. So feel free to hit me with questions on whatever subject you want. But my general take on Afghanistan was I was extremely frustrated with the rhetoric that led up to this awful decision, what I consider to be a very awful decision, to leave abruptly, completely. And that rhetoric can be reduced to slogans like "Bring the troops home," "No more endless wars." I think this has been that very populist sentiment that occurs on both the left and the right. I'd say mostly the left, and about half the right wingers repeat it as well. I think has caused this strategic disaster, and it doesn't seem like anybody wants to feel accountable for that. everybody wants to say, well, the withdrawal was botched. It could have been done better. My response to that has been, I don't know how you would do it better. I don't know how you go down to 0 troops and do that better. I mean, you might leave a situation where the Afghan government's still in charge, but okay, so what? The Taliban take over 2 months later, 6 months later? The end result is still the same. It's actually more disastrous because then you definitely wouldn't get your people out. So, I'm very angry about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a huge stain. And I'm one of those people who said, yeah, I mean, we do need a presence there. We absolutely do, because the alternative is going back to the circumstances that led to 9/11 in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know the inside story of how it went down, obviously. But if I had been president, right, God forbid, but if I'd been president and in charge of that decision, I think I would have probably listened to my military advisors and kept enough of a force there so that we don't have a large exposure, but enough of a force there that would keep the Taliban from overrunning Kabul and the other major cities, but not such a massive presence that it becomes a sort of rallying cry for jihad, like drive the evil empire out of Afghanistan, which clearly when we had 100,000 troops there, I'm sure that was something the Taliban were using as a way of recruiting troops to their side. So can you keep a below the radar presence that guarantees a minimal Afghan security, but without creating a vulnerability for us? I think there's probably a number of a few thousand, particularly special ops and air power, that could have done that. I think that's what I would have done. And going into this, I was hoping that that's what Biden would have done. I voted for the man. He didn't do it. But what I will end with this. I think the larger framework for this is 20 years of very poor strategy and outrageous mistakes by both Democratic and Republican administrations in Afghanistan. This is the culmination of 20 years of failed and poor strategy in that country.
Yeah, that's certainly a fair criticism. But my next question is always, I think it's easy to point out some failures in hindsight. I'm not always sure that it's easy to point to a certain time, or freeze a certain time frame and say it was really obvious to these guys that they should have done something different at this moment. Right. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. There was certainly institutional inertia, and just coming from the military, that's something that happens. You go on your tour every 2 years, and it becomes rinse and repeat, and everybody's okay with that as long as some metrics change that you can point to in your fit rep for the next, for your next review board. But I'm not so sure. I mean, look, I can point to certain mistakes, like telling the Taliban that we're going to leave on a timeline after we surge, I think is a strategic error. Is that what caused the loss of the war? I'm not so sure. I don't know. I mean, what are a couple mistakes, just briefly, that you think?
So I was there with Massoud in 2000, and he warned us, right? I spent 2 months with him in the north. He was like, listen, there's a huge attack coming in the west, right? And by Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and it's coming. Like, he knew. He had intelligence, right? And he even traveled to Paris and told the French government that, and nobody listened, right? And so 9/11 happens, and I rushed back there, and the people of Kabul are just overjoyed when we get in there. And by we, I mean the Northern Alliance and a few journalists got in there. When people found out that I was American, people on the street found out that I was American, they would come up and hug me and thank me for what my country had done, right? It was an amazing feeling. And the Taliban were a paper tiger. They folded very easily. Al-Qaeda fled. I mean, it was a complete and utter rout for them. And what did we do? We left 10,000 American troops in that vast, complicated country. 10,000 troops. There's 40,000 cops in New York City. That wasn't going to work, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know why. I mean, I think probably because we were gearing up for Iraq, but whatever. We don't even need to go there. The truth is that we left a very, very low troop presence there. And the Afghans were like, that's not going to work. Are you kidding? The way we tried to make up for that shortfall was basically paying off armed groups, essentially warlords, to sort of help us fight. But that just became part of the sort of like the culture of corruption in that country. And I remember when I was in Afghanistan in 1996, I was driving around the outskirts of Kabul, and the Taliban front lines were right at the edge of Kabul in the summer of 96. And we got shot at. Some guy opened up with a PKM on us, right? And we got to safety, and the Afghan guy I was with said, we hate those people. And the guy I was with was Pashtun, right? He said, we hate those people, the Taliban, we hate them, but we're going to let them in because they are going to clean up corruption. And that's the thing that's killing Afghanistan is corruption. And they let them in. The Taliban didn't fight their way across Afghanistan. They talked their way across, as they did this last time. And they talked their way across by saying, we will clean up, we will rid you of the evil of corruption, which is exactly what the Shabab did in Somalia, Boko Haram in Nigeria, that ISIS, like the thing that they represent, supposedly, is an uncorruptible organization. And so the Taliban came in, and indeed they did clean up corruption. They beheaded anyone who was corrupt, right? I mean, it worked, right, in their own harsh way, and I loathed them, but it kind of worked. And so when the U.S. came in, the one thing that we did not attend to was corruption. In fact, we funneled hundreds of billions of dollars in there, and we didn't monitor those funds, right? I mean, we didn't monitor where the money was going for the ANA, the Afghan National Army. Of course, the commanders were siphoning it all off. We didn't monitor anything. We just pumped it full of money, and we basically that was corruption on steroids. So the Afghan soldiers, of course, like I wouldn't have fought for that government either, right? For the Afghan government. If I were Afghan, I wouldn't die for that government.
Mm-hmm.
There were a bunch of self-serving crooks. We stood up that government. I mean, that at the end of the day, that is the strategic mistake that I think we made.
Yeah, it's another point you make is, if you're going to go all in. And, politically, that's difficult in this country because we're obsessed with the troop numbers. Like I was saying about the slogans, just get the troops out. Well, we have a few thousand there. Is that okay? No, I want them all out. It's an endless war. It's a very emotional reaction that the general public has to this. Never mind that we have 30,000 troops in South Korea. It doesn't seem to bother anybody, or 30,000 in Germany, or I think more in Japan. So never mind all that. But for some reason, this just drives people crazy to hear those numbers. And like you said, you compare it to New York police, there's 40,000 people. I don't know that we've learned any lessons there. You like to look at military history, just that's clear from the books you write. Yeah. Would we be better off going in that all-in kind of strategy, at least temporarily? Or was there, here's another question. Was there any way to build a proper Afghan government that we could trust and that would have the trust of the Afghan people? Or is that corruption so embedded in their culture that it was a worthless fight to begin with?
Well, I mean, look, now it's too late. Had we gone in with 100, 200,000 troops right after 9/11, we would have caught bin Laden a whole lot sooner, right? We basically let him get away in Tora Bora. I think Donald Rumsfeld even refused to send in the Rangers to try to corner him. I don't know what the thinking was there. And I know, whatever, I can hypothesize, but basically when you needed a surge was January 2002. And after we lost 3,000 civilians on 9/11 and they brought down the towers and hit the Pentagon, that merits 10,000 troops in the country of origin of that tragedy is just insane, right?
Yeah.
Like what were they thinking?
And to your point, I think there would have been more political support for it as well. Probably.
Of course, no one would have blinked. I mean, look, in Iran, not our friend, right? In Iran, after 9/11, in a soccer stadium during a soccer match, they stopped to have a moment of silence for the victims of 9/11 in Iran, right?
Yeah.
We had world support. We had the support of almost everyone in this country. And more important than either of those two things, we had Afghan support. The Afghans were desperate for someone to come in and to stabilize the country, defeat the Taliban, and to impose an honest government, or to offer an honest government. And I mean, listen, there's corruption everywhere. There's corruption in this country. The question is, what are you doing things that mitigate the effect of corruption? And when you when you refuse, as the U.S. State Department did, when you refuse to make people in the Afghan government accountable for the money, the American money that we give them, right? These are taxpayer dollars. The money that we give them, when we refuse to force them to be accountable for it, you are basically saying, you know what, we're going to turn a blind eye to corruption. You all do what you want. There were plenty of indicators through every administration that corruption was off the charts and that it was undermining the war effort, and nobody wanted to deal with it. I spoke with John Kerry about it in 2010. He did not want to hear about it. The Bush administration did not want to hear about it. I mean, nobody did, Democrat and Republican alike. And you could have fixed it. You could have offered the Afghans a reputable government, and we just didn't do it.
Yeah, again, it was that momentum. It's hard to deal with those things. It's easier it's easy, especially for the military, to figure out combat operations. Okay, these are my objectives. I just go do. It's much harder to root out corruption in a government that you don't fully control. And the Karzai government had basically established these deals with warlords all over the country. For their loyalty, you get to be a little corrupt, or a lot of corrupt. And I think we underestimated how much that eroded trust from the Afghan people into the government, allowed the Taliban to build these shadow governments, especially in the rural areas. I mean, I still don't think the Taliban ever saw support in the urban areas, but we let that fall too. It goes to show, and this gets to your book, Freedom. We ran out of time fast. We got a lot of things to talk about because I wanted to hit PTSD with you too on Tribe. I think you have some interesting insights into the psychology of PTSD, what it is and what it isn't. But maybe we'll get to that. Maybe we can wrap that into discussion about freedom. But one thing you do talk about freedom in the book Freedom is the small insurgency versus large armies, and how it's throughout human history, it is not obvious, and it is far from a foregone conclusion that a large standing army will beat these smaller, more mobile forces. Afghanistan being a prime example of that. The battles with Apache Indians is another example that you bring up, being a prime example of that. And it also, I think, helps explain to people why this large Afghan army that we left in place with a bunch of American weaponry just couldn't fend off the Taliban, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about humans is alone among mammals, a smaller individual can defeat a larger individual in combat. And if you look at the early days of the MMA, mixed martial arts, there were very small men, particularly with the men. There were very small men who defeated much, much larger fighters. And that's because, strength and size is definitely an asset, but it comes with a huge cost. And the cost is that the bigger you are, the bigger your muscles, the more oxygen you use up, right? So if the fight goes, if you're fighting a 300-pound guy in an elevator and there's nowhere to move, he's going to win, right? Like, he's going to win very quickly. But as soon as there's some room to maneuver, and as soon as the large fighter wastes a bunch of energy throwing punches that don't connect, if you can stay out of reach of those devastating blows, the larger person often will get winded before the smaller person. And that truth scales up very, very well to the level of insurgencies. So the Montenegrins were a wild mountain tribe in the 1600s, and the Ottoman Empire invaded Montenegro over and over again, right? They outnumbered the Montenegrins 12-1. And the Montenegrins just kept defeating them because basically the Montenegrins remained mobile and selectively deadly and out of reach of the Ottomans until the Ottomans just ran out of gas. They just could not keep up the effort, very much like a large guy in a boxing ring and very much like the American forces in Afghanistan. The Taliban didn't defeat us. They just avoided defeat. They avoided defeat long enough for us to basically lose our will and choose to not engage with this anymore. And, I loathe the Taliban. I don't know how I feel about the Montenegrins, but I loathe the Taliban, right? They're a ghastly regime. But I say in my book, if it weren't possible for the smaller person or the smaller force to at least occasionally defeat the larger one, if that were not possible, if we were chimpanzees or any other mammalian species, basically freedom would not be possible. I mean, freedom is a smaller group maintaining its autonomy in the face of a larger group. And the world is not run by a bunch of fascist megastates. It actually, like the smaller groups, actually have an amazing amount of agency, amazing amount of ability to determine their own affairs, their own future.
Well, yeah, and the American Revolution's obviously an example of that, where you have a highly regimented, superior British force that we were able to be victorious against, in some senses by outlasting them, by just not being totally defeated. Very similar situation, but also by engaging in tactics that they viewed as cowardly, but were also effective. These sort of guerrilla warfare kind of tactics. Of course, it doesn't always work. I mean, there's certainly totalitarian regimes that maintain their hold on power, and the Taliban now being one of them, I suppose. And who's going to take them out with now that they're the conventional force, so to speak. It's an interesting analysis, but on the book, it's an interesting read because it's effectively your notes and your thoughts from this long journey that you took, about 400 miles along the railroads of the East Coast. So one of my questions as I was reading this was when you started that journey and you did it with a couple veterans, you did it with a whole variety of people at different times. I found out at the end of the book, but it's irrelevant to the story itself, how you did it. But I was curious, when you started it, were you seeking these answers on what freedom meant, or were you just looking to do something? Were you just like, I just need to get out a little bit and challenge myself? I mean, I guess I kind of get it. I mean, and I, by the way, I've seen these. One of my wife's good friends she grew up with did. Maybe you've seen this documentary called Bastard's Road. Does that sound familiar at all? And and he's just like, I just have to go walk. I just have to go, and I'm going to walk to every guy who was in my company. We went through a horrible amount of casualties in Iraq, and I just need to see them, and I need to walk there. I don't want to fly there. I want to walk there. I don't know what this drive is, this inner drive. Is that what it was, or did you have like this book in mind?
Well, no, I mean, I wish I could say that I was that good at planning my life, but I'm not, right? So back in 2012, when I started this, I had no idea I was going to write a book called Freedom. I didn't even know I was going to write a book called Tribe, which was the book, following. So I had given up on war reporting. I was no longer going back to war zones anymore. I was trying to have a sort of deeper understanding of my own country. And we chose the railroad lines very, very explicitly. It's illegal. Right. We were getting away with something the entire way. We were part homeless, part fugitive, basically. And, we could have walked along the Appalachian Trail, which is lovely, but I wanted to be part of society. I wanted to have to deal with society, and railroad lines go right through the middle of everything. They go through the suburbs, industrial wasteland, the ghetto, the wilderness, farms, right through the middle of everything. And I wanted us to be able to slip in and out of society at will. The railroad lines also are these swaths of no man's land. Now, technically, it's illegal to be there, and we had the cops looking for us quite a lot, and they never managed to catch us. But there are these swaths of no man's land, and you can really do what you want. They're not really monitored. So we were sleeping under bridges and abandoned buildings and getting our water out of creeks and cooking over campfires and dodging the police and walking 10 or 20 miles a day with pretty heavy loads, and so for us, the reason we did that was to encounter this country, but also to encounter each other. Like I wanted to be in a situation that was raw and hard, difficult, and sometimes a little dangerous, where I needed the men around me in order to make it turn out okay. And that reminded me of combat, and that felt elemental and healthy and healing. I was in the middle of a divorce at the time, and and it kind of worked, for off and on for a year. We moved up the East Coast from DC to Philly. And then we decided, instead of going to New York, we decided to turn west and head for Pittsburgh. And we wound up on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. And it was an extraordinary, extraordinary experience.
I'm going to read page 33. for most of human history, freedom had to be at least suffered for, if not died for, and that raised its value to something almost sacred. In modern democracies, however, an ethos of public sacrifice is rarely needed because freedom and survival are more or less guaranteed. That is a great blessing, but allows people to believe that any sacrifice at all, rationing water during a drought, for example, are forms of government tyranny. They are no more forms of government tyranny than rationing water on a lifeboat. The idea that we can enjoy the benefits of a society while owing nothing in return is literally infantile. Only a child owes nothing, and that's interesting. And I frame it in a political sense. It kind of gets to what I was talking about, what I asked about before, which was, have we completely set aside any notion of sacrifice and suffering? Is any hardship that we endure now an injustice being imposed against us, either by another group or by government or by the patriarchy, or whatever it is, whatever the new villain is for that day. But you could also read this from the liberal point of view, what you wrote here, and say that the people who claim that you shouldn't have to pay any taxes. Now, there's not that many of those people. I think the right is characterized a little bit on that, and that they're being infantile, right? That they think like any contribution asked of them whatsoever is an injustice against them, but an injustice from a different form, in the form of government tyranny. And I don't know, maybe that's how I kind of looked at that passage. Maybe you could unpack it from your point of view.
Yeah. So basically, the right wing perspective is correct, and the left wing perspective is correct. I mean, the left composes half of the population, and the right composes half the population. So there's legitimacy on both sides, and I think the problem now is that our society, our media, the media ecosystem, and increasingly the government is struggling to integrate those two worthy positions into a functional middle ground, a functional whole. And there's a lot of data, there's a lot of evidence, a lot of research showing that our political predispositions are partly inherited, right? They're partly rooted in our DNA. There literally is conservative and liberal genetics in our DNA as a product of our evolution as a species, right? Which means that both of those viewpoints are adaptive. They help our survival. Like in the classic conservative viewpoint is be careful of outsiders. You don't know who they are. We don't necessarily want to let them in without vetting them. Like very, very sensible. Likewise, the classic liberal viewpoint is don't worry about the outsiders. If we're mistreating each other, if this is an unfair society, then if there are no, say, laws that protect labor, as there weren't 100 years ago, then the society is going to break up. It's in danger. A very, very legitimate viewpoint. You put those together, you have a bulletproof society. And so, what I would say here is that for all of human history, the idea that you could be part of a survival group but not owe it anything was just absurd, right? No, you got to help get in the wheat. You got to help hunt the antelope. You got to help, grind the corn. Whatever it may be, whatever level of society you're at, you have to help because you're getting a lot from this. So you have to contribute to it. And one of the things I think is really bizarre on both the left and the right is the idea that you get all of this, right? All of this that society offers without having to contribute at all. And you know what? The government does get to tell you what to do. Like during World War II, they were afraid of German air raids of the German Air Force bombing New York. They were literally afraid that we would get bombed, right? So there were curfews where you had to turn out your light at dark in New York, right? If the situation's extreme enough, the government does get to step in and say, we all need this to happen. Is it onerous? Is it unpleasant? Does it suck? Yes, it does. But we got to do this, right? So the government can tell us, you have to drive on the right-hand side of the road. You cannot. You may think you're free, but you can't drive on the left-hand side of the road. You're going to kill somebody. And if you don't, you're going to get arrested. And we all acknowledge the legitimacy of that. So the great conversation between conservatives and liberals is, where does the government cross that line of unlawful, immoral, unwarranted government control of the individual? Mm-hmm. That's an open question. There is no fixed point. That's the conversation. That's the compromise.
Yeah.
Is it a requirement?
It's the balance.
It's a balance. Is it a requirement to wear masks during a pandemic? Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't have the answer, but that is where the conversation is. And if you don't like where the conversation winds up, and you just really do want to be able to run red lights, whether, whatever the consequences, if you can vote the bastards out, or you can take it to court and challenge the government in court.
Yeah. And, it gets to the conversation of, what is freedom? Is this libertine society where you can just do whatever you want? Is that how you would define freedom? Because it's not how a conservative would define freedom. It might be how an extreme libertarian might define freedom, an extreme libertarian. And maybe also these sort of socialist anarchists, which I don't see how those two words can be the same person, but that's how they describe themselves. But a reason I don't understand how it's the same ideology, or how they can coexist within the same mind, is because socialism by definition is making other people do things you want to in a pretty exceptional degree. Whereas anarchy is nobody can make anybody do anything. So it's interesting, but it's out there and it's weird. But in any case, that's sort of one side of what some people might think of as freedom. Like, I can do whatever I want, and it's Mad Max. It's the apocalypse. Who cares? And then there's ordered liberty, which I think is the American style of freedom, which is you're free because you live within a set of rules. And what's interesting about your journey is you were really trying to push against that notion in a way, right? Like you said, you went on railroad tracks because it was illegal, because you're like, I want to push against these rules a little bit, and it makes us feel more free. And that's interesting. The other interesting thing that you said was, and again, the need to contribute to society. And I think both the left and the right agree on that. It's just a matter of how much. Right. The right focuses on personal responsibility as a primary driver, and as a Judeo-Christian moral framework as a primary driver of doing what we're supposed to do. And then the government's laws should just be outgrowths of those natural laws, right? That's how the right sees it. The left is much more comfortable with saying, this is my value, and I want other people to live by that value. And I find that to be too much, And I also find it not to work very well. Like, I think socialism works quite well in a co-op with about 200 people or less. There's been studies on this. It works okay, but the further out you get, the more you scale that out, the harder it is to make that work, and the more you need a proper incentive structure and a proper set of rules. But I don't know. Maybe you can respond to any of that. I was again kind of curious your psychology as you were pushing up against that notion of freedom on your journey.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know a lot of people that grew up under communism. I was married once before. I have a family now, a wonderful family, but I was married when I was younger. I was married to a woman who grew up in Bulgaria under communism, right? And it didn't work very well. But what's really interesting is that the concept is sort of evolutionarily sound, right? And if you get a kind of survival group, like humans have survived in nature for 200,000 years in groups of 30, 40, 50, 100, maybe 200, right? That's also the size of a company in the military, right? I mean, that sort of maneuver unit is just about the maximum size where you can engage with every individual and kind of know them and feel a personal loyalty to them because they're also in that group. By the time you get to the battalion level or the brigade level, it's pretty abstract, right? Okay, yeah, you're in the 173rd Airborne, but whatever, that's a concept, that's not a group. So at that level of 100, 150, 200 people, that's sort of like communitarian living, reflects our human evolution, and it works quite well, right? It doesn't scale up very well. And so, what I would say is that the socialism as an ideal, it doesn't work, but B, I don't think that really characterizes the Democratic Party, right? I mean, they're not a socialist party. They're left of center, but socialism is a very, very particular thing. You nationalize all the industries. You guarantee everybody a sort of a minimum livelihood. There is nationalized healthcare. Like, there's a great uniformity across society. I don't think that's, say, what Biden is arguing for. It's a wing of the left, and I don't think it's a wing that has a whole lot of political power at the moment. And it clearly doesn't work. I mean, you just look at Europe, it clearly does not work, and neither does fascism, right? The equivalent on the right is fascism. And fascism, that extreme sort of ordering of society from the hierarchy from the top down, and a mass deprivation of people's individual rights in favor of the ruling political party. Like, my father grew up under fascism in Spain. He and his family fled in 1936 when Franco took over. That doesn't work very well either. I mean, fascist regimes are famously short-lived and rarely pass power on to the next iteration, to the son or what have you of the fascist. And one of the interesting things about democracy is that it's amazingly enduring. And not only does it create great affluence in the society, but there is almost invariably a peaceful transfer of power. And democracy is associated with very, very robust military capability. I mean, it kind of has it all, right? And a fairly just society. So that's, if you want a society that's stable and works well and can defend itself, you're really looking at some kind of democratic system.
I want to quibble with a couple things. Okay, this is just quibbling, but I agree that fascism is the extreme tendency of the right, but of the European right. I don't see that in the American right. I think the European right is this, because I can look up the definition of fascism: political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Many of these things are the antithesis of what the right believes. It seems to me that in the American right, if taken to our extreme, it would look closer to anarchy, right? It would look closer to libertarianism, because which I'm not for. But it would look a lot closer to that, because every policy we seem to be in favor of erodes power from the federal government and places it in the hands of states, according to our Constitution. On the concern I have with the Democrats and their flirtation with socialism, yeah, it's true for now that they're not advocating for the nationalization of all industries, except for healthcare, and I would say, and now the banks. I mean, they're flirting more openly with banks as well. I mean, Elizabeth Warren has a bill that would allow the government to basically take away or deliver a permit to a company just because it has over $1 billion in assets. That sounds to me very quickly like nationalization. The Facebook whistleblower that we saw recently, one of her main goals was to have, as she put it, someone like her, which I thought was hilarious that she was so open about that, but someone like her be in charge of a review board that would basically say whether a Facebook or a Google is acting ethically in that moment. And what they want is very different from what I want as a consumer. We're all mad at Facebook. But I'm mad at Facebook because I think they censor too much. They're mad at Facebook because they don't censor enough, and they don't censor like people like me enough. And so we just come at it very differently. And I'll openly say I think the biggest fascists in America are those anti-fascists, those Antifa guys who go around engaging in what are exactly fascist tactics. Anyway, you could if you want to respond to that.
So fascism isn't necessarily violence. I mean, there's left-wing violence, and Antifa, whatever that is. I mean, they don't have a headquarters. I don't know quite what they are. They seem like they're more like an idea, but to the extent that
they're an idea with a lot of people that break a lot of things. So I mean, there's something, right?
Yeah, but I mean, whatever. Mobs across the political spectrum have broken things. What I would say is that to the extent that they use violence, they're violent, right? That's not. Fascism isn't, and anti-fascism don't. Neither of them own the use of violence to achieve a political objective. I mean, so my dad grew up in Spain. He fled when the fascists came in, and the way they came in. And I'm saying this in preparation for some comments on the last political year in this country. So the way Franco came in was by the progressives. A progressive coalition had won an election and won it soundly, right? And Franco came in saying the re-election was rigged, and it was a cabal of like Jewish socialist conspirators who were taking over Spain. and that true Spaniards had to rally. It was a white Christian nation. I mean, he said all of these things, right? It's a white Christian nation that had to rally to defend Spain's honor and reclaim Spain from the communists and the Jews and the and people who weren't really Spanish. Even if they had Spanish citizenship, they didn't really deserve to be Spanish because they were left wing. I mean, that was the rhetoric that Franco used, right? And it worked. And he got the church, he got the wealthy, most of the wealthy class, and he got a lot of the generals. He got most of the military, and it worked. And they took over Spain, and 500,000 people were killed. It was ghastly. My father fled at age 13 with his family to Germany, and to Spain, to France, and then was driven out when the Germans came in. He had to leave France. His father was Jewish. So I'm saying that because you can find examples of that kind of rhetoric in the extreme right movement leading up to January 6th. There are people saying America's a white Christian country. It's partly that, but it's not entirely that. People literally saying the election was fraudulent. It clearly wasn't, and the entire GOP leadership affirmed the legitimacy of the election. But that was, as did the courts and Republican electoral officials and governors and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The entire GOP establishment affirmed it. But that still wasn't enough. So you can, all of the rhetoric that Franco used to legitimize himself, you can find that rhetoric on the extreme right, like you can find really extreme communist socialist rhetoric on the extreme left. You can find rhetoric on both of those sides. And what I would say is that neither is American, right? In the sense that we understand that word as a representative democracy where every vote counts, and we strive for a government that is more or less in the center, sometimes left, sometimes right, but more or less in the center.
And then the question is always, what do you do with the power? So let's say that those extreme versions got that power. The question is what they do with it. Here's where it gets very, very different from the European right. See, the European right, what does it do with it? Well, it seeks more power, changes institutions in order to garner more power. There's no indication that ever would have happened on the American right. The American right is very much, leave me the hell alone. I want to read my Bible and I want my guns. And I don't like anybody telling me what to do, freedom and all that. And I would also say that you can find the exact same rhetoric on the left when Trump won, the undermining of any whiteness. So the opposite of saying this is a white Christian nation is to say that there's no whiteness in this nation. In fact, it's just we stole it from the Indians. We're here illegally. We should all leave. Well, then why don't you leave? Well, because I don't want. Anyway, I never understood that contradiction. But so that's the other side of it. And Donald Trump's election was fraudulent because it was a Russia collusion narrative that was going on. And so it feels to me, I always kind of try to take a step back and say, like, how bad is this? Because where I was at. Maybe you don't. On the whole January 6th conversation, I was very much against it. I was not a part of that. I think the entire process on January 6th is deeply unconstitutional. But that's kind of a separate discussion from the discussion we're having. So, I tend to agree. I don't tend to think that it's as bad as some people make it when they make these connections to really, really awful, these awful historical analogies to times when it did go really, really awfully. I hope I don't have to eat my words one day, but so far, so good. American institutions hold up pretty well. And it's important to be grateful for those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But continuing on the conversation of like what freedom is, because I'm very interested in this kind of philosophically. And just kind of pulling on some of the threads that you have in here, and I want to get you to expand on it because, and I'm really pulling on the stuff that I think you can connect to politics. I mean, I see things through the frame of politics often. So, in one part, what was interesting on page 107 was you start talking about the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality in a society, and you're making a connection between levels of freedom and levels of inequality. And I wanted you to expand on that a little bit, because while I can definitely see how a society can unravel if there's an unfair amount of inequality, but of course, unfair being the key word there, because it's not obvious to me that you being much wealthier than me destabilizes our relationship within a society necessarily. Inequality has risen, but also, if you and I are the only people in a country, and you make $100,000 a year and I make $50,000 a year, but we both double our income, well, guess what? The inequality also doubled. But I would think that our standard of living is better too. So it's a complicated discussion. But I'm more curious how you relate it to the concept of freedom.
Yeah. So the Gini coefficient measures income inequality, and social inequality can lead to income inequality, right? So racism or lack of education or being born into a wealthy family can set people on a course that either advantages them or makes it hard for they to better themselves, right? And so one of the arguments for having an egalitarian society is that it gives everyone sort of an equal opportunity to better themselves. And by egalitarian, it means, basically it means people have equal rights, right? That no one has a sort of special privilege, that you can't throw $50 million at your criminal defense and win a case where you're actually guilty. Like that, even though that works in the legal system, everyone sort of knows in their gut that doesn't feel very fair, because the guy who's working in a factory and makes $70K, having done the same thing, clearly couldn't defend himself like that and is going to jail. Like, that's not fair. I mean, we all sort of know that. So at any rate, the Gini coefficient measures income inequality. The most egalitarian societies were hunter-gatherer societies. You can't carry wealth if you're on the move. Everyone's needed to contribute for survival. And the Gini coefficient for those societies, which is sort of the ancient human norm, is about 0.25. Right, so 0 is absolute identical equality, income equality for everybody. And 1.0 is one person has all of it and everyone else has nothing, right? That doesn't work either, obviously. So 0.25 seems to be the sort of evolutionary human norm, and it's quite stable. It works quite well. America is about 0.4, right? Medieval Europe, which was extremely unequal, it was basically a ruling elite and a whole lot of serfs, right? That was almost 0.8, right? So in medieval Europe, what you had were this ruling elite that were not subject to any laws. They basically controlled the entire national economy, and they owned land, and they could basically do anything they wanted. And the serfs were economically, politically, and legally disenfranchised, right? That's high Gini coefficient, and it's not very stable. And when the Black Death, when the Great Plague hit Europe, it caused the collapse of that system. And it's not a very resilient, that high Gini coefficient is not very resilient. So what I'm saying in the book is that, and low Gini coefficient is not correlated with global power. So I just thought it was interesting, like a low Gini coefficient is very stable, socially stable. But when you look at the great empires that have controlled a lot of the world, a lot of the world's resources, and really influenced the outcome of human culture, human society, the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire and the British Empire and what you might call the American Empire, when you look at those systems, they have moderately high Gini coefficients, right? And we're all, liberals and conservatives alike, we are the beneficiaries of this modern industrial technological state that's the product of a moderately high Gini coefficient, right? So all I'm saying, I'm a journalist, I'm agnostic, I'm not telling anyone what to think about anything, right? I'm just saying, you want a very fair society? We're not there. It's actually not an egalitarian society economically. If you want a very powerful society, you want a Gini coefficient in the middle. If you want to create a society that is just ripe for a catastrophe, have a Gini coefficient of 0.8, and then eventually what happened in medieval Europe will eventually happen here.
Yeah, there's some interesting insights into that. Especially when the most powerful countries tend to have a slightly higher Gini coefficient, or as you said, around 0.5, right? America's a 0.4. That intuitively makes sense because you have to be wealthy to be powerful. You have to be able to create wealth and create things, create a large military, create a large economy. And if you have pure egalitarianism, you cannot create these things because you've removed all incentives to produce anything at all. So, you know, I would push back. I don't think that's stable. I think it might work for tribes. I think it might work for these smaller groups that we talk about it. I don't see how it possibly works at large scale, which is why socialism fails. So, because socialism is that tribal desire to make everybody the same, right? They define fairness differently than I define fairness, and even you in what your comments, you sort of define fairness different than how I define fairness, because I define fairness proportionally. You know, if you work harder than me, you deserve more. To me, that's fair. If you're more talented than me, even if I work harder and you get more because you're more talented and you've got a better, you're better at writing than I am. It doesn't make me feel bad that you're more successful. And so go ahead.
Yeah, just let me just say that if you work hard, you can work hard at a low wage job and not make much money, and you can work hard at a high wage job and make a lot of money, right? So who's to say that coal miners work less hard than surgeons? They don't. They work just as hard, right? So the thing about a small scale organic tribal society is that everyone's on the same technological level. And it's a hunter-gatherer economy, and everyone has to contribute probably 5 or 6 hours of work per day, and everyone survives fine. The complicated thing about capitalism, and capitalism brings an enormous amount of good to society. I'm not knocking capitalism, but one of the outcomes that can feel unfair is that people can be born into situations where it's easier for them to earn $1 million than other people. And they're the identical people, right? And that's what feels unfair. I don't know how you fix that, but the idea of an egalitarian society isn't that everyone's the same, is that everyone has the same opportunities.
Well,
That's
yeah,
what
but in our criticism of the left is always, because we're always like, we agree with equality of opportunity too, but we feel that left-wing policies tend to blur the line between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome.
Absolutely.
Because once you start punishing success in almost this like resentful kind of way, I would say a wealth tax is that. I would say a lot of the policies are, to be honest, because once you start driving towards fixing outcomes, because in the aggregate you see these disparities, and then there's this assumption that these disparities are a result of some kind of discrimination or some kind of injustice or some kind of unfair behavior, when in reality, they, like you said, oftentimes it's luck. Luck has a lot to do with it. But also, yeah, I mean, if I was born into a wealthier family, I may have had a different kind of life. The question is, are you living in a country that you can at least build that you can at least start that intergenerational wealth? Because people look at like wealthy families. Well, the thing is they've been doing it for a very long time. Oftentimes, I mean, there's a father or a grandfather that did something really risky and really American, frankly, and then pass it along to their kids. But and is it up to us as a society to then punish that kid, that grandchild, because they were just born into a luckier situation than the others? And I'm not sure where that gets us, to be honest. Like I get the sense that comes from the left that this isn't fair. I absolutely am sympathetic to that, but we have to be very careful to remain principled in how we deal with it.
Well, I mean, listen, the trajectory of people's lives are largely formed by their education, the education that they have available to them. I mean, I'm a successful author, I would say almost exclusively because I had a great education, right? I mean, I went to private school. Whatever. I was a smart kid, but I wasn't smarter than anybody else. I mean, whatever, and I had a family where, we read and we talked about things, and all the preconditions for intellectual success, economic success were in my background, right? And had I grown up in, a small town a coal mining town in West Virginia with a dad who was out of work, it might not have turned out as well, right? So if you look at January 6th, now look, to be just totally clear, I was horrified by what happened in the Capitol on January 6th. I'm totally opposed to it. But let's just assume good motivations by most of those people, right? There's a few crazies, but let's just assume most of them were sort of at least thought for a while they were doing something good, right? I'm guessing there were very few millionaires in that crowd. I'm guessing a lot of the people in that building had earned very, very moderate incomes. and that if you look at the income disparity in this country, in America right now, that income disparity has gotten worse and worse, meaning grown in my lifetime, right? And I'm guessing if you plotted the incomes of people in that building, it's at the lower half of the American income spectrum, right? And so, are they? Of course, they're frustrated, right? They're working just as hard as everybody else who's making a lot of money. The left-wing elites, for that matter, the right-wing elites, they're working just as hard as those people, and they're making 10%, 15% of what those people make. And it may be because they didn't try very hard. It may be because they didn't have a good education, whatever. But it must feel enormously unfair to them.
Well, there's actually been studies on this. It's really not what you think on this particular group of people, because they actually are wealthier than you think. They're definitely not millionaires, but
right.
They're upper working class for the vast majority of which. It's a very extreme situation and group. So I don't know how it. I'm not sure it's
upper working class does not make a lot of money. I'm sorry, they pay their bills. Yeah,
but if you listen to them, if you listen to their frustrations, and there is this sort of there is to an extent this kind of populist uprising on the right that looks very similar to the frustrations of the left, which is why you see a lot of union workers transition from voting for Barack Obama to Donald Trump. So that sentiment is out there. The question is, what do we do with it? But when you really dig in with these folks, economics have something to do with it. I mean, they're complicated people, just like individuals are. A lot of it's cultural. A lot of it is cultural. Now, are they racist? I mean, that's what the New York Times likes to say. I don't think they are. I mean, a lot of them voted for Barack Obama, so I don't. Right. It's not obvious to me that these people are racist. And that's kind of a cheap argument, but they do feel like, especially the woke culture, they do feel like the woke culture is something that they have to react against, that they have to be against. And of course, I would agree with them. And so I don't know. I think they're more complicated than that. I think they do feel they don't like Jeff Bezos. They don't like really rich people. But I wonder if they would like him if he gave himself a paycheck. Right. Instead of not giving himself a paycheck and therefore not having to pay income taxes on it, and it's like when I tell guys like Bernie Sanders, I'm like, maybe we should just have a minimum wage for CEOs that are really, really wealthy. And then you would get your income tax from them. Yeah. Did you ever think of that?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. I think that the tax structure in this country is problematic in all kinds of ways. But one of the ways is that wealthy people can avoid paying the tax that they legally owe. And there's plenty of left-wing people that do that and right-wing people that do that. And we all know it. And I think it's frustrating. And, what I was saying about the folks on January 6th, I'm not saying that economic hardship drove them into that building. I think they were driven into that building by a big lie that the election was stolen. And if I thought an election was stolen, I might go into a government building also. But I'm just pointing out the fact that those people in that building were not the quote wealthy class in America, right? As you say, they're working class people, upper level working class, and that, given the Gini coefficient that we have, which is roughly equivalent to the Roman Empire, that's not in the top third, or probably not even in the middle third of this country.
But back to my original question, what does that have to do with freedom? And I suppose it depends on how we define freedom and what like a good freedom situation might be for us. What would be the ideal situation? How do these dynamics play out in that sense?
Well, typically in a democracy, your freedom comes from the fact that if the government is legally constrained from imposing arbitrary rules and regulations, and if they try to, they can be taken to court, and that if you still don't like the outcomes, you can vote in a different administration that conducts policies that are more to your liking, and that it will always seesaw back and forth between sort of center left to center right. Are there extreme voices on both sides? Yeah, of course there are, right? And they're largely irrelevant. And if the really radical woke left started to sort of take over the levers of power in the DNC, I'd be alarmed. If the really radical fascist right wing was able to do that as well, I would be alarmed. But right now, even Donald Trump, who was like, in my opinion, politically pretty out there in terms of respecting the sort of institutions and functioning of a democracy. In fact, his policies were fairly centrist, right? And they weren't that radical. And so that's how a democracy maintains sort of a modicum of freedom for basically everybody, that there's recourse, right? If you don't like the country, you can vote in a new government and or take the government to court. But in a sort of broader human sense, there are two main threats to our freedom, right? The one is an outside power coming in and killing and enslaving us. And that's been true for 200,000 years, right? And even before that, 6 million years ago, we diverged from chimpanzees. In chimpanzee society, there are still troops of male groups of chimpanzees that will go into the territory of a rival chimpanzee troop and kill all the males one by one and take over the territory and the females, right? Now that, the defeated troop was unable to maintain their freedom from oppression by their rivals. And so the first order of business in any human society is to be able to defend yourself, a classic right-wing concern, as well it might be, right? And then the second threat to our freedom is an abusive, in modern terms, we might call it a fascist leader or a communist leader, a totalitarian leader that uses the apparatus of state, uses the military to impose their will on the populace and extract a sort of maximum economic benefit personally from the hard work of everybody else, right? And that's exactly what Franco did. It's what Hitler did. It's what Stalin did. It's what Mussolini did. I mean, that's what fascists do. That's what totalitarian leaders do. So what you have to do is be able to defend yourself as a society, but not have that army, that military, then be used by a leader, a supreme leader, to oppress the people. And democracy is basically a fairly elegant solution to the problem of defense and internal fairness.
I agree with all that. I mean, so we would have very similar definitions of the role of government then, and how it should be imposed. And of course, those interpretations vary across the political spectrum. And democracy is good, but a republic is better, is what I would say, because in a democracy, 51% of the population could say, well, that rest of the 49% has to pay all their taxes to me. And hey, it's democracy. We voted on it. It's what happens in the House right now. I mean, this is one of the reasons we don't have very good relationships with the other side of the aisle right now, is because they actually believe that they can vote to take our paychecks away if we don't follow their silly rules that they kind of made up within this last year. That's a problem. I mean, it's a problem mostly internally here for general cordiality and friendships across the aisle. But it also gets to a bigger problem with why our framers, I think, developed a republic as a way to preserve freedoms as opposed to a pure democracy that is defined by limitations.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a democratic republic. I mean, the idea of democracy is still in there. People vote, right? Yeah. But obviously, it's not 50.0001% of the vote gets to tell the other side. Yeah.
Oh,
right.
And I'm not saying that's what you were saying either. I don't mean to be putting those words in your mouth. I was just expanding on it, really.
Yeah.
I've taken up a lot of your time. This is really interesting, though. So thank you for going at it. I don't always have guests on that I can kind of at least somewhat respectfully disagree with. So that's why I enjoyed this, and I particularly enjoy digging into the philosophy of what freedom means and how somebody on the center left versus the center right can really look at these issues. I think it's really great stuff. So I appreciate you going a little longer than we had planned.
Oh, listen, I enjoyed it. I mean, respectful disagreement is one of the great pleasures in life, and it really is the forum where people learn. Right? People do not learn by talking to like-minded people. They learn by talking to people they respect, who see things a little bit differently. And then your consciousness is expanded. And hopefully you wind up somewhere in the middle and can work in unison, shoulder to shoulder, for something that we can all agree on as a common good.
Oh, well, thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for all your great and interesting work over the years. Like I said, been a fan since I was in middle school. So, I mean, perfect storm. However, and I think it traumatized me a little bit. I have this constant fear of drowning. because all I think about is the captain of that ship going down in that giant wave. Anyway, we didn't even talk about the perfect storm, but it's a fascinating story because it's all based on what we basically think happened. I mean, because they didn't make it. And so it's just, but I've always been terrified of drowning. And then I became a SEAL. So, I don't know what the hell's wrong with me. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, listen, it was a real pleasure. Good luck to you with everything.
I appreciate it, Sebastian. Thanks for being on. Really do appreciate it.